Okay, welcome. It is week one, lecture two. We just did an office hour. That recording will be there. It was on forms. We didn't get to divs. I had a little bit of a personal issue. But we didn't get to divs, but we will continue to talk about that. And I can maybe talk about that tomorrow as well. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get going. We got a lot we got to cover. So I'm going to kind of go a little bit faster than normal as we got some discussion questions. Um, Christina is amazing, and a couple of you guys you've already been communicated with, but a couple of you guys are able to post, and we're able to kind of go in honestly from your view and see what you see. And so some of you guys are aware. Christina's already reached out. For those that are still having issues, our team is aware. I've let them know. So please just know that I'll work with you when it comes to discussion questions, and hopefully we have this resolved by the end of the day tomorrow. Core assignments, you have 3 core assignments due. As always, you can find these in your assignment checklist right here on our class sheet. We have our registration form, plotting our blocks, and GitHub blocks. So we'll make sure that you have all that information that you need in order to do all of those assignments. We did just talk about forms in office hour, so your registration form should be a-okay. There. That's some housekeeping. Again, our office hour was on forms. And so it's about 30, 45 minutes. Just as a reminder, all of those recordings can be here. So if you look at our class schedule, you can see here that we've got this yesterday's office hour, which was our tool walkthrough is there. And then our lecture is here. Now, this is the only place to find office hour. But if you were thinking about where else can I find the lecture, you can also find it here in lectures session 1, and then we have our intro with me. So you can find all of that information right there. Cool. So we've talked a little bit, or we talked a lot about HTML yesterday, right? We discovered and identified what is HTML, how do we write some HTML. So what I want to do is I want to have some basic, let's go ahead and make an HTML file, and then we're going to build on that and introduce something called CSS. So does anybody remember what is the secret kind of fast way to get an entire sort of boilerplate HTML here?
Exclamation point.
Exclamation point, exactly. Great. Awesome. Can anybody, yeah, and enter. I love that. Way to go, guys. Can anybody remember what this line is doing? What is this doing? At least everybody knew the exclamation point. Yeah, exactly, Austin. It's identifying in Kiana. Yeah, it's identifying the file type, right? When our browser's reading, we're saying, hey, this is an HTML file. This is saying that it's in English. That one's pretty there. This one's a little bit challenging. What does UTF-8 character set mean? Anybody remember? Quickly Google's character set UTF-8. What does it mean? Any ideas? Or how about
something about international, that it can be international or something, I thought it was.
Yeah, it's close, right? It's basically just us deciding what characters we're going to use, right? Sort of our standard and what we're going to be building. Yeah, exactly. Great job. Can anybody remember what viewport does? Kind of just using your context clues here. Viewport width equals device width. What could it be talking about?
It like tells you what screen it's going to be on and how it's supposed to format it.
Exactly, right? The size of the window, just like, yeah, exactly, Thomas, just like you, Uriah, are saying. What it kind of lets us know, what are we viewing this on? Is it on a tablet? Is it on a phone? Is it on a computer? What is the size of that? So that way it can adjust our HTML accordingly. Good job. And the last thing, document. Where is this stated?
Is it the tab name?
Yeah, the tab name right here, right? Just like that. Great job. So we're going to talk about CSS intro. We'll call that there. Oops. Perfect. I've got this head, and then I got these two meta and a title. What would we call this in relation to the meta and the title?
The
Parent and child.
Yeah. Yep, it's the parent, and the meta and the title would be considered
Child.
their children first of the head, but in relation, the meta and the title are. So just the meta.
Their
relations-
siblings.
Yeah, to the siblings. Exactly. Great job, guys. Cool. So you guys are wizards. You already know you're crushing HTML so far. Great. So can anybody tell me just a basic tag and what could I write here? Let's just add a few things here of what we know about HTML. What do you guys want to do?
H tag, H1.
Yeah, let's do an H1. What do you want to say?
Welcome to class.
Welcome to class. I love it. Perfect. Somebody else. What's another tag or text element that you know of, or any sort of element that we could do, except maybe an image. Yep, we do a P tag, Lucas. I don't know if you saw it from my screen, but we can do a P tag. And so, one thing I do want to sort of bring up is you might hear this thing called lorem ipsum. Lorem ipsum. And really what it is just fake words. And so if you ever hear lorem ipsum, I think it's Latin. But it's just like fake words. It's really to represent. So you're not like building out paragraphs. If you're like trying to create an image, you're like, oh, a paragraph's going to be here instead of just having a P tag, you can put a bunch of fake words. I think, Christina, is it lorem times 84? Yeah. So if you want, I can't remember what the 84, this feels like more than 84 words, but you can type lorem and then a multiplication and it will give you just a bunch of words. That's way more than 84, right? Let's do like lorem 20. That's, wait, 20 lines maybe? Yeah, that's what it is. 20 lines. I don't like that. Okay, but that's a way that you can do. Yeah. Cool. So great. We've got our P tag. We've got some lorem ipsum. Let's look and see what this is like, what this looks like. This is the wrong one. So let's come here. We're gonna right click. Or Alt B. It's going to open it up and cool. So we have our H1 that says welcome to class and we've got our paragraph. Now, can anybody tell me why, maybe you read ahead, you might tell me why these are on two different lines. Like why is it here and then it's here? Why aren't they side by side? Did anybody read ahead and know? Yeah. Yeah, Reba. So one thing to note, and we're going to get into CSS here in a second, is that each of these HTML tags have built-in properties already. Now remember, they have so many different things, like when we're talking about input, it's got all these attributes, all these built-in properties. If I'm inspecting and I look at this, right, I can see all of my elements and that's great. But I can also see my styles. So here, if I click on, if I have this and I click on something, you can see on the left right here that we've got this P tag that by default, it's got all of these attributes. It's got this color, it's got font, it's got size, right? So it's 16 pixels and times New Roman. And so I can look at it and it's not. But I see all of these different attributes, right? One of these attributes that we have is that it is what we call block or inline block. What block means is when I look at this element and we can see that it's going from blue and it goes all the way across. If it is a block element, it means that it takes up the entire width and nothing can be on its side, right? It can take up the entire width and nothing can be on its side. And so by default, lots of these elements are block and not inline block. Now, we're going to get to that tomorrow. We're going to really start moving those. But as you're starting with CSS and you're starting to understand CSS, it's really important that you know and can build that whatever the display is. And so see, here's what you can see is that by default, the display type is block, meaning it's going to take up the entire length. And then it's got some different attributes as well that we'll end up getting to. Same thing with H1. If I click on it, you see that by default, the display is block. And so then I can just have an understanding of what out of the gate or out of the box, what these different elements have. So I would encourage you as you're dealing with different elements, go ahead and inspect it and see what sort of default values it comes with, right? What's the difference between an H1 and an H2? What's the difference between a P tag and an LI tag? That way you have just an understanding of how these all work. Cool. So we are starting on CSS today. We're going to talk a little bit about properties and color. We're going to connect our CSS together. So we're going to connect it. And so that way we can read it. We're going to talk about sort of how CSS operates, how it works. Why is it called cascading style sheet? And we're going to deal with inline block and display, right? So that's our goals for today. There's an assignment called plotting your blocks that after this, hopefully you should be able to do. It's really just kind of dealing with color. You're going to give some of this information and you're going to have a color. You have all this built-in stuff that we'll look at here, but you'll have all of this information to kind of do this. But I don't want to jump ahead. So let's go ahead and start with selectors, right? Let's start with setting up our CSS. Now, if you guys remember from my analogy yesterday, our HTML was kind of when we're building a house, our HTML was the wood, it was the frame, it was what it looked like. Can anybody tell, or sorry, it was the frame and it laid out sort of the layout. Can anybody tell me what CSS represents?
That'd be like the walls and everything else in the house.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, what does it look like? Just like Lucas said, it's visual, right? How can we change colors? Do we want the walls to be a certain color? What texture do we have? Et cetera, et cetera. So CSS is the color of our web page, right? It is the style. So with that, oftentimes we call the file that we are using to edit and to create kind of the different page styles, we call it style. So in here, I'm going to call this, I'm going to say new file, and I'm going to say style.css. Why did that do that? Okay, perfect. This .css identifies and says, okay, this is a CSS sheet. This is for styling. Okay, perfect. And so now we can do a couple things. First off, this sheet can have all of this information, but how will my HTML know to go look and grab certain styles? And it is common to have multiple CSS styles or multiple CSS sheets for, you know, big application. So what we have to do is we have to tell our actual index file where to look, right? And so what we're going to do is within my head, we're going to create slash get this guy right here, this link. This is a self-closing tag. Great job, Adam. Yep, it's link. So we're going to come here and within the head, we're going to say link. And what we're going to do is I'm going to link some CSS. Now I could just say link and that's fine. Or I could say link CSS. And this is by default. VS Code sees that I have a style.css. And so here we've got a style sheet that's saying that, hey, this is going to be your CSS. And here's the reference. It's saying, go check this sheet so that you can change its styles. Now, we talked about this a little bit in office hours, so I want to make sure I identify this. It is not unique to have a style folder or a CSS folder, or whatever you want to call it, and have all of your CSS. If you have multiple, you're going to have also your CSS in there. If that's the case, what do I need to change on this link in order for it to go in and view this style form? Does anybody know?
CSS.
So we have the .css. That's the sheet that we're referring to, but how do I navigate towards it? Remember what this is doing. Yeah, exactly, Reba. Well, kind of Reba. There's one little area got, but I think it might be default. What this is going to do is that if we just say style CSS, there's a great thing here in the HTML, setting up our editor files and folders. I would really encourage you guys to look at this because this is going to be important for understanding folder structure and file structure. When we are dealing with, and this is really anything, we talked about this in office hour. Unfortunately, I forgot to record that portion. So that's why I'm hitting it now. Anytime we are referring to something, we have to give it the path and tell it where to look. If I just say style CSS, because it lives in index.html, that's where this link is. It is inferring that there is a sibling file of your index.html called style CSS. But if I'm looking at it, this is my entire sort of folder, but you can see the siblings of index.html. What I have direct access to is form.html, class overview.md, and this folder called style. So if I wanted to go into that and get this file right here, I have to say, okay, you currently have access to style. So go into style. And in style, there's going to be a file called CSS or styles.css. So now if I do that, we are good to go and we're linked. Now, if I had in another folder, let's say another folder, and my style CSS was in there, what would I have to do to this path? Anybody know?
/ another folder.
Yep, exactly, right? I'd have to say another folder. And this is common, like if you get to, like if you have a big project, you're going to have different paths. Now you could just right click and copy relative path. And that should get us there. Yep, same thing. That was what I copied. So you can do that. If you just say copy path, that sometimes can be an issue. So let's see what path is. Not all, yeah, so this is the path on where it is on your computer. Relative path is where it is relative to this folder in this assignment. Perfect. Cool. Now having another folder is kind of a bad idea. So I'm gonna take this, put it into style. And then this is going to be deleted. So I don't want to super confuse you guys. Oh, rip. Okay, we'll just redo it. I'm just gonna do style.css right now. What about this? I'm just gonna do a single file, but I just wanted to make sure I went over file structure there. So we come here. Now, because index.html has access to style CSS, right? They're on the same level. We can just do it just like this. Perfect. Great. So we've now linked our CSS. And let's kind of just go through here and see a couple basic things. When I'm dealing with, actually, let's talk about CSS a little bit. CSS stands for cascading style sheets. Cascading style sheets. Perfect. And so what this means is that it will start from the top and go all the way to the bottom. It kind of cascades down. That'll come into play here in a little bit. Don't worry about that right now, but that's what CSS stands for, cascading style sheets. What we can do now is actually target a couple different things, right? I can target, let's say, different elements. So in this case, I am targeting my body The way we do it is in my style sheet. I say the element I want to target. So in this case, it's body. Put this side by side. We got body, so we're targeting this and we're saying, hey, I want to change the background color of the body. Now, if we were to come here and I were to look and we have sort of this whole thing is our body. Let's see. Here, we see that it has a couple different attributes already. It's got display block and it's got a margin, which we're going to talk about margin here probably tomorrow, has a margin of 8 pixels. So these are the default attributes of body. What I'm wanting to do is I'm wanting to say, okay, I want to change the background color to this color right here. Cool. So we're changing the background color. Let's see what happens. We refresh. And now you can see that our background color changed, right? Our body, which is our entire thing, it's now changed from a background perspective. Now we have this blue color versus when we just had it as white. So the way that we changed that style is we said, okay, in our style.css, we've got our body element. The attribute that we're changing within body element is we are changing the background color. Now there are tons of attributes you can change, and we're not going to go through all of them one by one, but let's see if MDN has a lot. You can see that even just right here, there's so many different things that you can do when it comes to CSS, background color, size, bottom, if you have all kinds of stuff. And so we're not going to go through all of them, but we're going to just talk about a couple of them. So we now have officially changed our CSS background color to this blue color. Okay. Now, if I wanted to target the H1, how would I do that? Anybody know?
You do H1 then bracket.
Yeah, H1. And maybe I want to change the color to orange. And let's go ahead and align the text. That's one of the attributes to the center. So here we've got it right here. This is what it was by default. If I refresh, now our color has changed. And we see that it's aligned in the middle because I changed the text alignment. Change the text alignment. And so when we're dealing with these different colors, we are dealing with our selector, right? So we are selecting an element. And when we are doing that, it is changing that element. Now, let's say I had another p tag, or let's do a p tag. I'll say p. I'm going to change the size of the font and the font family. It's fine. So let's come here. Perfect. So it got a little bit bigger. Same. It's the same font family of Times New Roman. But let's say I had another p tag that was called p tag hello world. P tag. Now, if I were to do this, we see hello world, but we also see that it's larger, right? Let's say, for example, I only wanted this to be large. And I wanted this to be normal and I wanted this to be large. Well, by doing CSS, if we are tagging the element, that is all of the elements within your file. So if you have multiple p tags or multiple h1s and or bodies, but you're not going to have multiple bodies, but let's say you did, if we just do the element itself, it's going to change all of them. It's going to change all of them. So Adam has it. Levi, you had a great question. Adam had a great answer. What we can do is we can add some attributes to our p tags or our whatever tag we want to be able to specifically identify that p tag. So in this case, let's say that I'm going to kind of comment this out. And so my p tags are normal now. Perfect. And let's say I wanted just this one to be changed, right? What I can do is I can give it a class. And by giving it a class, what it is really kind of like a unique identifier, if you will, to this specific one, to this specific p tag. So I'm going to call this world. Just gonna call it world. I don't know why. Then what I can do is I can come here and instead of saying p tag, I can just say dot world. And what the dot will do is it says dot identifies that there is a class, that there is an element within my file that's got a class of world. And so we're saying, okay, whatever element has that class, here's the different things, or here's the attributes I want to change, or here's the styling I want to add. So now if I come here, we come back, and it's kind of hard to see. But here we've got this normal, and it looks big now because I just increased our view, but we see that we've got just this p tag was changed to having a red color. This one stayed normal. So this is the normal size. Oops. Yep, normal size. And you can see that this is red and this is kind of the normal size there. So that's really the class. That's the class attribute. Now, one thing to note is that you can, with a class, you can have multiple elements with the same class. So let's say that I had a UL, LI, and times 4. Now I'm going to teach you a little secret. So here we have this UL, LI times 4. We showed yesterday that you could do that. And then if I say, let's try dot world. I don't know if it's going to work. Yep. Okay, it does. Instead of having to redo all those classes, if you just say dot and then the class name, it'll automatically give you the class name here and it'll do it for you. So there's a little secret tidbit for you guys. So here I'm going to say item 1, item 2, item 3, and item 4. Okay. We see that both these elements, or I guess there's technically 5 elements, but both these styles, right? The p tag and the li tag both have a class of world. So what we can assume is that when this happens, we then see, and again, I'll go up so you can see that because we attach this class, it will by default, because we attach the class to both elements, it'll give it that style. So that's for a class. A class, the big things to note is a class can be applied to multiple elements. It's like the big thing. There's a second one that we can do instead of a class. Does anybody have an idea of what that could be?
ID.
An ID, exactly. This is my ID. Actually, I'm going to show you guys another secret. If I say P pound, let's call this hello or hello world, it'll automatically do this part for me. So that was P pound sign, and it gives an ID. If I do P dot, that gives me class, but that's just a little secret. So let's say this is my ID P tag. Perfect. Now here I've got just this information. Cool. This is my ID P tag. If I want to add this in, I'm going to call this hello. So I'm going to say hello. And you can tell that, let's do green. Perfect. You can tell, you can kind of infer, right? The dot in CSS kind of is why I can do like a dot world and it'll automatically, create a class. And if I do the pound sign or the hashtag, if you're a youngin, this number sign or hashtag hello identifies, okay, there is an ID within my HTML that has this aspect here of hello. So we're gonna say its color is green. So if I go back and I refresh, now it becomes green. Now, one thing to note is that an ID can only be applied to one element. It only works one time, right? A class can be, class is kind of loosey-goosey, right? You can apply it to a whole bunch of different things. Whereas an ID is dependent and can only be applied to once. You can't reuse an ID over and over in the same way that here we're kind of reusing class. Any questions so far, or how are we feeling? Put a 1 in the chat if this is making sense, put a 0 if it does not, but just simply between identifying these, the class and the ID.
Could you show one more time how to get all the different list items with the ID or whatever, it's with the class already on it?
Yeah. Yeah, I'll just put this in here for you. So it's UL and then LI times 4. So that if I just did this by default, that'll create me an unordered list. And within that, I have a list item, and then it's going to give me 4 of them. And I can just say dot world. By dot world, that means it's going to apply the class of world to each of my list items.
I had a quick question.
Sure.
So would you recommend going forward when we create like paragraph and so on, would you recommend having either an ID associated to it or a class? Just so
If
that
you're-
we can apply on the CSS.
Yeah, if you're wanting to do any sort of CSS with it, then yeah, I would say that you don't need to just slap on a class and have multiple classes if they're doing the same thing. And that's really where the key to a class comes in. There's this idea, and we're going to talk about kind of why this is important here in a second, that we want to have dry code. It means do not repeat yourself. Basically saying, you want to, if let's say that these were all individual, like this was class 1, class 2, class 3, class 4, and they were all going to be red, instead of having multiple classes and having to say dot class 1, dot class 2, and they all do the same thing, that's where classes really come in handy, right? It's like, now I can give them all this, and then I can just kind of add this in here, right? Like I can kind of reuse it.
Okay. And then one more question.
Yeah.
So let's say you wanted all of them to have like, let's say the same colors, but the style and something else is different. Can
Yeah.
you use multiple classes on that one? Like give it one class for where they all share the same color and then
You
they
can-
ID doing different things.
Yeah, so you can absolutely do that. So here, if I wanted to have, okay, so all of these are color red, but I wanted maybe this guy specifically to be a bigger font size, right? If I wanted to have multiple classes, I could just, let's say font, that's what we'll call it. I just have a space. And if there's a space in my class, then it's saying, okay, there's one class 1, which is world, and then there's font. So then all I would have to do is come in here and say dot font. And then let's say that, let's just get rid of this. Come in here now, if we refer this. Oh, did I say that? No, I didn't save this, sorry. Nothing happens, always make sure you save first. And then we come here. And so these are all still red. They still have that, but I'm able to identify and say, okay, for this one specifically, I want this to happen, right? I want this guy right here. And so now it's got multiple, it's got world and it's got font.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And if I wanted to do a shortcut there, then you could say P dot world dot font. And it'll give you it'll do that for you.
Okay, cool.
Great question. Okay.
I had a question.
Yeah, absolutely.
For what you said about using an ID only once, but you can use class multiple times. Is that,
Mhm.
did you mean by using like the same ID multiple times?
Yeah,
Like
so
for
I
this
could
one, you
not,
can use like the ID hello again since you used it just now.
yeah, like because I've declared it here, see how class, I can throw on a class on this element, on this element, on this element, on this element, on this element. An ID is supposed to be reserved for one element. So only this p tag should have the ID of hello.
Okay, so that should be the only ID hello in this
Mhm.
whole entire like length of code.
Yeah, exactly. And
Okay.
the reason is because we've talked about that you can have multiple. When this is cascading style sheets, there's also different, you can sort of think about them as like weights, but also levels of importance. The first one is going to be like level 1 is going to be your base element. Cool. So I've got an H1 here. Great. I can change the colors. Level 2 is your class. A class will always, kind of like rock, paper, scissors in a way. A class will always beat out an H1. So if our H1 says it's going to be the color orange, but a class says the color red, the class, because it has more weight, it'll be red. Right? It'll kind of supersede of importance. It's like a jester, a prince, and a king, right? The prince supersedes the jester. And so the class is sort of the prince of this, supersedes the jester, this base element here.
Okay.
But then the king is this ID. Nothing can overwrite what an ID says, right? An ID can overwrite a class because it has more weight, it is the most important. And so that's usually why IDs, I use them very sparingly. I'm like pretty class heavy personally, because it's kind of like no rules. It's pretty chill. An ID holds the most weight. And so let's say that I had something and I wanted all my p tags to do one specific thing, but then I put on hello and I alter that, that will always beat out any sort of style that my class has. So that's just something to note, is that anytime you've got an ID, that is sort of the creme de la creme. That is the most important piece. And with that, one thing to note is that with this cascading style sheet, it will take whatever the last red style for that element and apply it. What do I mean by that? Let's say that I've got this font and I've got world and I'm gonna say color is let's say Azul or Azure. No, that's probably not good. Let's do yellow. Gross. Cool. Now you see that for this guy right here, we've already seen that this is red, right? Because that's the color that's given to this p tag. Now it starts from the top and it reads, okay, the background is this color. Great. I can add that. H1s are these colors. Great. World. Great. The color is red. Perfect. I apply that. Because this tag also has font attached, it's going to read font next because it goes top to bottom. And because it has color, it's going to supersede or replace this guy right here because that's the last red color. Like READ, that's the last red color here for this element. So if I were to come here and I refresh, now this becomes yellow.
Okay, so the last one is the final one.
The last one is the final one. Mhm.
So the last one only gets red and ignores all the others before it.
Correct. As long
least-
as,
at least-
like
At
if
least
I
if
had
it
a,
goes to the
yeah,
Oh,
if
go
I
on.
had a p tag that says, I don't want this, I just want color. Let's see, blue violet. Let's see what happens. Come here. So because though the P tag was the last thing read, right? It read world, it read font, and then it read the P tag. Why didn't it convert here?
Because the other ones have a higher weight to it.
Exactly. Because a P tag cannot overwrite a class. Because a class, it's the jester making the final call, but it doesn't overwrite what the prince has said. Right? It does not hold more value. So though it changed here, right? Because this one doesn't have anything attached to it. And so it's like, yeah, whatever, P, cool. This can take place. That's fine. There's no rules there. But because these both had different classes on them, because of that, this does not overwrite because the weight of the weight of these classes overrules sort of this base element.
Oh, okay. And you said the 3 or 4, I guess, lines in this were ID is the highest. There was class that was below it.
Mhm.
And what were the other 2 before it?
And then it's just your base elements. That's really, those are the only 3. So it's your base element. So P tag. So in this case, the P tag, you have your classes and your IDs.
Alright, so ID, class, and just your basics, like P. Okay,
Yes.
okay. Thanks.
Yeah, of course. I want to talk a little bit about the format and in our style sheet. We say our element or class or ID that we're trying to identify. We say the attribute that we want to change. In this case, is background color. Then we say the colon. And then we give it a value. So in this case, background color, we give it a color value. And then we end it with a semicolon here. Now, I believe that if you don't have it, it still will work. So I think we just saw that, right? It'll still work because it infers it. But you want to make sure that you, especially as you're learning, you get in good habits and you write clean, readable, good, standard code. So again, it's your attribute, a colon, and then whatever value you're changing it to. In this case, we got a color, so we got blue, violet. So then we have this semicolon after. Okay, how are we feeling? Scale of 1 to 10 on CSS understanding and how to target. 1 to 10, 10 being the best. So I can see some 1. Sorry, I should have said that. 10 being you're crushing it. 1 being like, man, this is tough. And this is something that you practice and you will kind of get to in learning, especially when you have your assignments, like dealing with your selectors, right? These are just classes, class names. That is one thing to note is a class name. If you're going to have multiple, you can just do a dash or you can do the camel case, whichever one. But do not have like, if you have a space there, it's going to infer that you have 2 separate classes. Cool. And you can see that there's a little bit of CSS that you can see a little bit of things too, like the different attributes. Okay. This is just a sort of little assignment, or it's a quiz. So I don't want to jump into this, but actually let's see what else do I want to cover. These codes are being pretty slow today. Those are red, targeting different elements. Cool. So we've covered kind of a lot of that. So let's just kind of let's go here and we're going to do this little game just so that way you guys can see and we can kind of play this and kind of see how we're doing there. Okay, so we're going to go to level 1. So this is a great game. It's on the platform. I'll put it in the chat as well. This is a way that you can really practice your CSS. So if you're anything like less than a 10, which is a-okay if it's your first time listening to this, that's fine. So here, this is a game that we can play and have some fun. Can do a couple different things. What we're doing here is we're talking about select all elements of type A. Type refers to the type of tag, so div, p, and ul are all different types. Cool. So select elements by their type. So if I wanted to deal with this, let's see what it's saying. Select all elements of type A. I think it's what it's wanting is this guy. Type in a CSS selector. Oh, it's just wanting a specific one. So we know div is a CSS selector. What's happening? Oh, okay, sorry. It's wanting these guys right here. So it's saying, okay, type in a CSS selector of plate or bento. That's confusing. Sorry about that. So if I wanted to select this specific element, it'd be bento. Perfect. And if I wanted to deal with ID selector, right? So Joshua, I do see why you were super confusing there. I didn't see where it said select plates, but here we are. So here, type in CSS selector. If I am selecting an element with a specific ID, what is my ID? So how would I do that here? Oh, select the fancy plate. Oh, I see. Thank you, Reba. Yeah, but would I just type fancy here? If I just type fancy, what is that? That's saying that there's an element, right? So I could say fancy. Enter. Perfect. Select the apple on the plate. So this is one that is that we can kind of look at. We can either just say apple, but I want the apple on the plate. Right? Does anybody have an idea of how we can do that?
Would it be the plate heading with the apple as the sibling or as the child?
Yeah. So if I say something, this is a great thing. Let's say that I've got I wanted to target this. Let's say we didn't have a class here on any of these. This might probably be my last point of the night, and then we'll kind of wrap up. But I wanted to target these specific items here. What I could do is I could say UL LI in the same way that we kind of do that when we are dealing with like creating this UL, and inside of UL, I want some LIs. What this is doing is this is saying all of the LIs within the UL. So all of these is my selector. So if I want to go into my UL and I want to select an element, I can do that. In this case, it's red. So if I save this, this should operate the same way. And it does, right? I refresh and this is red. This gets really important because if I've got, let's say for some reason, I'm going to break some rules here and I've got an A tag, it's Google, right? Doesn't have anything in there. But I've got this different piece of information, right? What is one way that if let's say I wanted to make these red and I wanted to do something with this. What is a clever way? Would I have to give both of these classes, or what do you think a clever way, knowing this, that we could kind of differentiate between the two?
Would it be UL greater than A?
Yeah, it'd be UL greater than A. So we could do that. Now just know that UL greater than A is all of the A tags within a UL. So let's say that I had two of these. Right? And I wanted just specifically these to be changed. What could I do? A span tag's not a bad idea.
Would you give that specific A tag an ID?
You could. You could, but if I did that, then I'd have to give this LI tag some sort of attribute as well.
Perhaps given the parent tag like an ID or a class.
Yes. If I say something like class Kiana, Kiana, what I can then do is instead of just saying UL, I can say Kiana A tags. And Kiana LI. So now what I can do is, uh-oh. Oh, anybody see my error?
Save.
You see it?
Yeah, you have to hit save on the styles.css.
Save. But Reba, I think you might have it. Nick, you might have it. Remember, lowercase k is different than uppercase K. Right? So it's going to treat them as two different things. So now, if I refresh, because we just added, and this is this idea of dry code, right? Because we just added a class to this element, the parent, I can then target everything. Even if I have 100 things in there, I could target it. We change what's going on here. And now just specifically that one was changed. This other one operates as normal. Operates as normal. Let's call that green. Call it gray. Okay. So now these operate as normal just because I added a class. And so hopefully you can see that as we're dealing with selectors and CSS and just changing colors and changing base things, we can start adding in classes and IDs to help us target specific elements that we want to change and alter in some way, whether that's the parent or the element in itself. And the big takeaway, remember, is that you can pair classes. You can have multiple classes. And so like this guy has both. Okay. I'm going to stop there. Are there any questions on what we talked about today?
I have a little thing to ask about having multiple classes.
Mhm.
Instead of just giving something, I think this is just a little more confusing for adding multiple classes, because instead of just having multiple classes, I would have to go through multiple different classes as it goes down from top to bottom. Would it not be easier just to make everything just have one specific and unique class rather than having something have multiples?
Yeah, so great question. The idea behind multiple classes right now with what we're doing, because we just took off the class portion, kind of doesn't make sense. But here, if we've got, let's say here, here, maybe we called it world. Where it would come in handy is if we've got, we'll call this world 2. I'll show you kind of why multiple classes might come in handy. If I've got world 2 right here, right? And let's go ahead and get rid of this. Well, I'm gonna get rid of this. Cool. I just want my P tags font size to be higher, but I want it to have the color of red. And let's say I wanted this specific P tag and these LIs to be the same color. Well, what I would then have to do is have world, and I would have to have dot world 2 color, but instead of yellow, we're going to do red. Perfect. And you see that I'm sort of repeating myself. And so what I can do is instead of having to say like LI color, P color, I can separate into multiple classes. And then just say, oh, instead of having to repeat myself, I can just do this. And now every element that needs to be read will be read.
Okay.
And then if I just need to change one little thing about this P tag, I can just add on a font, but I don't want my LIs to also be 20 pixels. That's just reserved for my P tag. And so that's where sort of the power of multiple classes can come from. By not having to repeat myself so much. Now at the beginning, you'll probably repeat yourself because you guys are learning, right? Like that's a very normal and expected thing. So if for right now, Jacob, it makes a little bit more sense to make it unique, do that. What I always tell people is it's called like brute force, like try to just get it working and done. And then go back and say, can I optimize this in any way? So anything that's repeating itself that I could maybe add into one class and multiple classes, that's very okay. That's very normal. And I think that's a great way to learn.
Okay. And another small question, for like class, or for like the P tag with the two classes, does the order matter? Like if you did like font world in the P
Nope, it
tag?
doesn't. The only order that matters is in the actual style CSS sheet.
Okay.
Just like if font was above, and let's say like we saw with the different color, just whatever's the last is what will be applied. Like it can overwrite. But here it doesn't matter.
Okay.
Great question though. Anybody else have any other questions on CSS? What we did today, classes, IDs, creating, connecting. So as a recap, we connected our CSS sheet. We're able to identify different elements, change different attributes of it. We're able to create classes and IDs. We understood the order of each, which carries the most importance. Tomorrow, just as a reminder, we will have class tomorrow. It is always going to be recorded. So if you cannot join, that is a-okay. Tomorrow, what we'll do is we're going to talk about positioning. We're going to talk about divs, because you're going to need to know divs for everything, but it's going to be really important for positioning. And then we're going to talk about what we call display flex, understanding display flex and how to work that. That way you have GitHub blocks and plotting your blocks. It's going to be much, much easier for that. So other than that, that is all I have for you guys tonight. It is right on the money for time spent. I hope you guys have a wonderful night and we will see you tomorrow. And again, if you can't join, it will be recorded. Have a great night, guys.